In 1995, a baby was left for dead in a dumpster, but 20 years on, she was reunited with her savior. Morgan Hill always knew that she was adopted, but it wasn't until she turned 18 that she learned how she'd once made headlines as Mary Grace, a tiny baby who was abandoned in a Chicago dumpster. So after hearing the full, horrifying story, Hill went on a 2-year search for the construction worker who'd saved her life. Indeed, Morgan Hill's mom and dad never made any secret of the fact that they were not her biological parents. For her whole life, in fact, they made sure that she knew that she was adopted. But it wasn't until 2014 that Hill would learn her full, heartbreaking backstory. Unbeknownst to her, almost 21 years ago, she was the cause of a major news story in Chicago. Yes, headlines from October 1995 told the story of an infant who had been cruelly abandoned in a dumpster by her mother. Fortunately, a worker on the site had been dropping off some trash when his attention was caught by a whimpering noise from within the dumpster. It was then that he made his miraculous discovery. Later, speaking to WMAQ, Hill said he was dropping off the last load of trash from the construction area he was working on. Before he dropped it in, he heard a whimper. He found a white kitchen bag that was double knotted. Shockingly, Hill was inside that bag. So although Hill always knew that she had been put into care, no one had mentioned her heartbreaking true story before. And yet, as soon as she learned of her tragic delivery into the world, she began a desperate search for the man whom she now refers to as her guardian angel. Fortunately, the man who found Hill took her to a local hospital, and it was there that she was given the initial name of Mary Grace. But after hitting the headlines, the baby was soon adopted by Sandy Hill and given a new name, Morgan. In a generous act, Morgan's adoptive mom kept hold of all the newspaper clippings concerning Morgan. Still, nothing could have prepared Morgan for the reality of her sad start. So when it was time for her mom to tell her, as Hill told KSHB, she could barely get it out. She was basically already crying before telling me. Hill continued, "I honestly didn't know what to think when she was telling me. She had the binder of articles and just had me read through all of them." One by one, Hill read through the newspaper clippings, each one revealing the horrifying details of her first 24 hours. So she read how a man named Gerald Rocky Hyatt had been working on a nearby construction site, and that when he'd taken a load of trash to the dumpster, he'd heard a whimper. Hearing the noise again, moreover, he spotted a twitching trash bag. Then he panicked and ran to the nearest hospital. Next, Hyatt quickly returned with 3 nurses, and one nurse, Carol Safransky, tore the bag open and found 2 tiny blue eyes staring back at her. So it was that the otherwise healthy child was named Mary Grace by the nurses before being adopted by Sandy Hill and her husband Tracy. Authorities, meanwhile, eventually traced Hill's birth mother. Strangely, she'd hidden the fact that she was pregnant and, after a home delivery, had, appallingly, tried to dispose of the child before anyone found out about it. In fact, it's believed that the father hadn't known about the baby until he was named in court. Hill's biological mother was later indicted for attempted first-degree murder, as police believed she deliberately left the baby in the dumpster to die. All Hill knew of the woman who'd given birth to her in the first few hours of her life had come from those vintage newspaper clippings. But there was one more thing that Hill was aware of. She knew that she wanted to meet the man who'd found and saved her. She wanted to thank the man in person. After all, she wouldn't have had the beautiful life she knows today without him. Therefore, Hill looked for him, albeit without success, for 2 years. Unbeknownst to Hill, however, a journalist she had been speaking with vowed to do whatever she could to help find Gerald Rocky Hyatt. The journalist furthermore tracked the man down in Kentucky, and she discovered that he'd always wondered what had become of the baby girl he had found in the trash. And so the journalist set up a surprise for Hill. While being interviewed about the story of her life, she asked Hill for the name of her hero. And as Hill said, "Gerald Rocky Hyatt," the journalist replied, "He just walked in your house." Hill then turned around and immediately tears began to fall. The pair hugged, and Hill, in floods of tears, simply said, "Thank you so much." Hyatt replied, "It's been a privilege. You've been a blessing." Hill then got to hear her story from the first time from someone who was actually there. In fact, Hyatt recalled it as if it had happened yesterday. What's more, it became apparent just how close a call it had been for Hill that day. Hyatt revealed that as he had dropped off the last of the construction trash that was due for morning collection, he was unsure whether the noise was made by a baby or a cat. It was only when he decided to take a closer look that he had found Hill all wrapped up. At the time, Hyatt was given a gold pin of an angel to mark his act of heroism. However, at the meeting, after having kept hold of the item for 20 years, he presented it to Hill. And it's a pin, Hill later said, that she often proudly wears, perhaps to have her guardian angel watching over her all the time. "I couldn't thank him enough," Hill told NBC Chicago. "He gave me a chance to live a second life, because if he didn't find me, I would not be here to help others." Hill now wants to raise awareness of safe havens around the country, where parents can leave unwanted babies, no questions asked, so as to avoid her own history being repeated. Please share this video with your friends below.